Well, in this episode, I have a very most special guest, my daughter, Trevi. How are you, Trevi?
Hello. I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm great. It's fun interviewing you. I know we're in the same house, just on different sides,
Yeah.
but I really wanted to spend some time just letting you share more of your story because I just know it's been a certain encouragement to me and your mom, but also to other people. And really, the people who watch or listen to this interview are typically those who have a heart for reaching people from a more of a post-Christian experience. And growing up in Austin, and of course, before that, Los Angeles, that was definitely the school district. That was definitely your friends. So talk about, you're coming from a perspective of a young adult, but what makes it hard, you think, for your friends, for Gen Z to buy into faith or Christianity or Jesus?
Yeah. Well, definitely I feel because of the way it's been presented to my generation, I feel like it's different than it might have been for older generations. Whereas in the past, it sounds like Jesus was known as like this good, like it was like universally known he was good. It was universally known that he was, you know, just like I've heard him be described as like a good prophet in the past or whatever. Whereas now there's like this question of, is he good or is he credible? Is this legit? Because of the kind of stereotypes that are attached to his name through what people perceive Christianity as. I feel like it's been through the representation that it's gotten a new sort of name for itself. So I feel, I mean, the human tendency is for us to want to have control. And whenever there's this sort of opening as to, well, is it even credible? Is it even legitimate for me to consider? If the answer to that is no, based off of what you've decided in the context of our culture, then there's no reason to then look into it. So I think that the main first step is to be establishing why Jesus is good and how we know that the Bible is credible. And that's kind of the segue into discovering more of the truths that are followed through that.
Yeah. Well, and for you, I mean, you were young when you decided to follow Jesus. Of course, I've told that story many, many times that you had said, I think you were at 3 or 4 when you said, I told Jesus I would be his leader when I
Yeah.
asked you about following him. But you did get baptized when you were about 6, but then middle school came, and I think there were doubts and, others probably peer pressuring you, or, maybe it was just the irrelevance of how we were presenting things. But you went on a journey, not necessarily away from faith, but definitely not as sincere about your faith. Kind of share a little bit about that. What helped you go from you had to go to church, or you loved going to church as a kid, to it you had to where you want to?
Yeah. Well, definitely in the beginning, it was like you want to go to church. And I think that something I'm really grateful for is being brought up in the faith that, I learned of whenever I was a kid. I think it made certain concepts like, cherubim, or even the idea of there being an omniscient God. Like, I think it made it easier to believe whenever I got older. So it was like definitely a good foundation. And as a kid, I couldn't complain. It was what I knew. But whenever you start to grow up and see, especially like being in public school or like even watching certain TV shows and like seeing what the differences are between the culture and between what, Christianity is, it was definitely there were a lot of enticing elements that were from this world of like kind of being your own judge, or making decisions by what you and your heart wants, kind of. And so being in school, seeing people do whatever they want, it's like, oh, well, what do I want, kind of thing. And when you haven't experienced life that much, it's easy to be like, well, if my heart wants it, then it's good. So that's kind of more in general terms, but definitely it's easier to just forget about, you know, what God wants or what a higher authority would want, because all you feel is just what you want. And pursuing that for several years definitely manifested in these ways that were cool at times, but they didn't last. Like the like the pleasures of it were cool and stuff, but then there was still that lack of like assured like security that then led me to crave more. I have always had this sort of existential, it's not, rare for me to have those moments where I think of things in like a very existential way. So whenever I would get in those places when I was far from God in my actions, it felt very daunting and isolating. But after a breakup specifically, I like had like this void that left me much more desperate to where I like needed like God. Like I always believed in him, but I didn't have to do anything according to it because I didn't want to. And it was easy to just like forget about that and just do what's right in front of you. But whenever I was faced with like a breakup, or glimpses here and there of any sort of like real hardship, it always would bring me back to like God. And so I started watching more sermons online. Like I remember I first started watching Joyce Meyer, and then I remember I saw Relationship Goals by Michael Todd from Transformation Church. That was like back in 2018. And I would watch those occasionally, but even that just had like this little door that left me wanting to know a little bit more. And I think after the breakup and then a couple months later, the pandemic starting, I kind of wanted to see like through my desperation, like who God was. Like it was no longer that I wanted to know, it's like I needed to know, because the fun is only so long. And the friends that you pour your whole like life into, and even like the relationships that you pour your whole trust into, like they only can carry so much. And I think I got to the limit of that, specifically with the breakup, and then having like no ability to hang out with friends because of like COVID, because our family was like super shut down. Like we were definitely like in lockdown at our house. And so I started watching sermons on Sunday because I was raised to know that like going to church is good, but I started to see why, even whenever I didn't want to be there, even whenever I was mad to go, me going every week, I still like would pick up little things, whether or not I showed it or expressed it. So whenever COVID came and Sundays would come along, it was like, well, like, oh, this is interesting. I can choose like what I want to do. Cause I knew that I wanted to go to church. I don't even know why at that time, but like I still did have that desire, but it was really cool kind of discovering who Jesus was to me in that season, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, and you and I have similar personalities, and your mom is, very unique in that she, basically decided to follow Jesus at 6, has never really doubted and always did the right thing, and so when she and I would talk about, how we wanted to raise you and your brother, I wanted to make you do the right thing. And then out of that, you come around to then realize, yes, this is good. Whereas she didn't feel that need and, just assumed you would want to do the right thing. But because, again, you and I are very similar, I do think, I do wonder if there was a stretch of years, kind of middle school where we would make you go to youth group, just like we would make you go to school on Monday.
Yeah.
But and then oftentimes you would say, nope, I don't want to go to youth group. Instead, you'd sit in the auditorium. But then eventually you did go into the youth group. And there were a couple of moments that were, I think, really powerful for you. And I wanted to just kind of talk a little bit about how, your struggle with anxiety, which is a generation or, it's a genealogical thing that's passed down to you from me, and probably your mom to some degree. But talk about some of those encounters with God, even when you didn't necessarily want to be there and you're
Mhm.
wrestling with anxiety, how God met you in that.
Yeah, well, you're definitely I had a lot of anxiety, which obviously but for anyone watching, I had a lot of anxiety where I would have like panic attacks at least every week from the ages of like 8 to 16. So for a long time that was just like kind of what I felt like my personality or like my identity was. So in some ways I actually am very grateful for that sort of I don't know if crutch is the phrase, but that sort of impairment of, where I had something that I constantly did need to think of God for. Because if I didn't have that sort of struggle, and for other people it's different things, but for me it was anxiety. If I didn't have that, then I wouldn't have, thought to even depend on God when I was more far away. And so even just the fact of like having that struggle, like I needed to depend on him like whenever those would come. So I think that those actually ended up being helpful. But to kind of answer your question more, there were definitely like certain times where like in the youth group, like someone would give like a message that would like stick out to me or something like that. But even just kind of being able to go to you guys in my desperation, what I always liked was I could, yeah, at first it was definitely kind of annoying. I remember anytime I would ask for advice, mom would always just talk about God, and it was kind of like I just saw it coming, and like I just knew she would say something like that. But they did like stick with me, and then I think over time, like it was reminding me that whenever I need to know more, that you guys were people that I could turn to in that sort of way. And so even in my anxiety or whatever else I was going through, being able to come to you guys completely where I was at and knowing that you guys had certain answers that I hadn't yet looked into was definitely super helpful. And even now, like you guys know so much about God. So whenever I have questions, it's like I'll like sometimes think I have like, oh my gosh, I just thought of something no one's ever thought of. Like this ends everything. Like I literally just found the worst thing ever. There's no answer. And then I'll bring it to you. Like even last night I sent you a verse that I thought was weird. But then because of your relationship with God and mom's relationship with God, you guys know so much more than I do in that area. And so seeing how you guys are like so connected and like not even phased by the fear, I think has like been really cool and helpful. But I kind of forgot, what was your question? I don't
Well, no,
remember.
I think you answered it in many ways. I was asking though, there were some moments where you felt God's presence, like you had
Oh
an
yeah.
encounter with God. Maybe talk a little bit about that because you certainly, God, I believe God is pursuing everyone, but you also have to be in position to experience his pursuit, but also have an open heart and open mind.
Mhm.
So to talk about that for a moment.
For do you mean during my like younger years whenever I was more distant, or just like a general?
Kind of even what brought you back. I remember there was a
Mhm.
moment that happened in maybe a couple moments in youth group and then
Mhm.
youth camp and then Puerto Rico, because we didn't make you go to youth camp. We didn't make you go on mission trips. We did make you go every Sunday, but we didn't put you kind of, beyond that Sunday commitment. And I'm glad we did, but I also, understand some parents are kind of wrestling through what do I make my kids do? And for us,
Yeah.
we wanted you to be there on Sundays, but we didn't make you go to youth group. I mean, sorry, to camp or these mission trips. And
Mhm.
you did eventually want to do those things and had even more, special experiences with God. But to get to that place, there were a
Mhm.
few moments. Maybe you could share one or two of them.
Yeah, well, it's funny because my motives for going to, because I only went to like the youth camp, like I think once, other than whenever I was like in, elementary.
Yeah.
But my motives for that weren't entirely because of something like super spiritual. I just remember it was like, well, this is probably my last chance. I know a lot of the kids go and they like it. So like if I'm gonna go, I'm gonna go. It was kind of more of like a experiential thing along with the mission trip, but through even those like random motives, God met me where they definitely like I felt his presence even though I wasn't expecting to, because I was just going because it was like, well, this is my last chance kind of deal. But then whenever it came to like COVID and me like watching church on my own time and wanting to discover on my own, like there were definitely times where like I felt like I had like a supernatural encounter with him, where I would just I don't know how applicable, like whenever it comes to how God pulls people in, I think it's less of an equation type thing where it's like if you're a parent, this is what you should do, because it's so much more about how God can use whatever the circumstances. Because something I had a problem with now being in a relationship with God is like I would really fear for my friends and kind of put it on myself as I was responsible for their connection with God or their salvation or all of that, where really recently I've just learned more about how important it is to be like a to represent that and make that be this pure thing through letting God love through me. And so I feel like whenever it comes to the concern of wanting people to experience God and pursue him, like that really is more of a thing of how God does it. But I think on a human end, what is most helpful is just like living out how Jesus has taught us to biblically, but also even in like the spiritual Holy Spirit tap on our shoulder with like direction and guidance. And so like with you guys, like having me go to the church and having me go weekly to that, I was able to hear more about what the Bible is, because I wasn't reading it at the time. So I was hearing what I'd never heard of, and then seeing how you guys would apply it at home and see it be like a more tangible thing. And then seeing how it would change people's lives, I think was what kind of even let my experiential, I might as well also be kind of tied into, well, a little bit subconscious of, will it change me in that way? So I think the main thing is just like being a living example, not through like this manipulation of how I look, but through like literally in the darkness, like laying it down to God so that in the light people can see the genuine transformation.
Yeah, I feel like one of the things we learned when you were kind of wrestling through things in middle school, which middle school is hard for everybody, but we had just moved. It's a big deal to move across country. I still think that something that God used, certainly in my life through that season, as you were kind of wrestling with God and, is he real to me? And if he is, how am I going to live? I do think that when your mom and I shifted from trying to tell you what to do in terms of like, always preaching at you, so to speak, into owning our own journey and sharing more about what we're learning and sharing more about our struggles and saying we're sorry, like I remember going through recovery while you're in middle school, going into high school, and just learning to overcome some of my anger and some of my, it really behind the anger was anxiety, my control issues. I'd love to hear how not just that affected you, but what are some of the other things that maybe helped you that we did, or some of the things that we did that was not as helpful for those, parents who are listening. Yeah, just for you. And I know every journey is different. And I loved how you reminded us that ultimately God's the one who's pursuing. So there's not like a formula to make sure it happens for each person listening, but just maybe a few other things you liked, things that were hard that we could have done better. I'd love to hear some of your perspective on that.
Yeah, you kind of just touched on this, but like definitely whenever I look back in hindsight, the things that would inspire me most in a way that led me to God was um the less of like the preaching. You guys didn't really do that too often, but like it wasn't when you guys would lay it out so literally. It was more of like the way you would love, or the way that you guys would be quick to apologize, even as the parents. Like the ways that I was able to learn throughout the years that you guys were credible kind of then opens the door for, or it's kind of like how in certain like mission trips, for example, like if you go and just only evangelize rather than helping the practical need, then you're not going to have that. It's almost like you don't have that privilege to then speak into their life. So I feel like when you're living with someone and raising them, or whatever your relationship to whoever is, like your opportunity is through the love. And in the Bible, it says things like that, about how it's so important to love others because of that reason, of how it then gives you more of this opportunity to where you have the privilege to be able to say things that touch them. Where if you just preach at, or if you were to just have enforce, then I wouldn't have been able to see the trueness of it. Or like there's a Bible verse that I actually wrote down because I thought that it would be probably come up. But in 1 Corinthians 13:1, it says, if I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I'm only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. And I think that that is like the main thing, is like, it sounds so cliche and people say it and you've heard it so many times, but like the way you love people is genuinely like the resemblance of, or it's just like such a that's kind of the opening, not advertisement, but it's what people see and what people are paying attention to. And even with helping my friends in what ways I can, like there's not always an opportunity where they want to hear about what I believe. And I will bring it up like whenever it seems appropriate, of course. But the main things that I feel like I have seen people be most influential in is the way that they care for people, even while they're in different places. And I think that you guys were really good at doing that because you weren't always like trying to like enforce it in this way that made me feel claustrophobic. It was like always an option. And I definitely knew that you guys believed that, which was good, but it wasn't like forced upon me in any type of way, which I think made it look more attractive because I knew it wasn't like this like cult or something, because I knew it was an option rather than,
Yeah.
me conforming, I guess. Yeah.
Well, and I'm super grateful for people like John Ing and Ricky Etchiona and Hannah Ojeda and Tara Browder, other adults that you started to look to and listen to. And, you were even in a group with Ricky leading it for a while. Having others, I think this was a big part of the journey, I think, is having others beside your parents
Yeah.
and perhaps cooler than your parents that love that are helping you see this as a way to live life. Another thing that we got a couple things of advice that people gave us. I remember somebody saying, whenever your kids are teenagers, anytime they want to do something with you, say yes, because eventually you didn't want to hang out with us, but then all of a sudden you'd want to go to the mall or you'd want to go take pictures. And I remember so many times it's on those trips, and it might be like right when we sat down to watch a movie, you wanted to go out and do something with your mom or with me, but it was during those trips where you'd open up about things happening in your life. You wouldn't say, I need to talk to you about something. It would happen while we were on the go.
Mm.
And then another, Tim Keller said, the importance of absorbing the emotions around you instead of getting triggered by your kid who may be triggered, but learning how to like take in those negative, angry emotions and breathe back peace. And we didn't always do that well, but I remember thinking of that often. Is there any other advice you'd give for people, not just trying to help their kids find faith, but trying to reach your generation? Is there other things that you see? You've been helping with the college group now. You're certainly volunteering with the teenagers before you moved to Paris as a missionary. We're super excited about that for you. But is there anything that you could advice you'd give for reaching others your age?
Yeah, I mean, I actually, before I even move on to that, I think that you made a very great point that I forgot about. But having people besides your parents or anything like that, like people that you feel like you can relate to, like for me, Ricky really helped me a lot. And even making it sounds like kind of funny, but like making it look cool. Like, because there is like something that like is definitely important, at least to my generation, or at least to me, where it's like it looked like it was like cool and like I wouldn't be, I don't know. I definitely feel like that was a legitimate part of it as well. But helping the generation, from my own opinion, and my own experiences, is definitely like having certain amounts of patience, but also having realness. Because um, I think everyone. I don't think it's just my generation, but people can really tell when you're kind of forcing things or if you're trying to appear a certain way. And I feel like the genuine authenticity of where you're coming from in the pursuit of reaching them, um like is important to be seen, because like often whenever you imagine like this door to door, almost like salesman kind of evangelism, like that, it can be used, but it's not as personal. And I feel like going alongside what I was saying about having like a genuine relationship with them, even while things are different, and also being real as they're real and asking questions about what they believe, and listening without just wanting to correct, and like just genuinely like hearing what they're saying, and like trying to like truly empathize and sympathize, and not just immediately jumping at anything you might disagree with, but listening and having like a genuine relationship that entails things beyond just uh, what you're trying to help them with, but also just having fun with them. And kind of the more, um, I mean, I'm sure most people would assume this, but just to really like have a fun reminder is just like having that genuine relationship. But also, I think what's made my generation be more open minded to other spiritual things, such as like more new age things, is because there is this um, obvious emptiness in this world. And I feel like if we don't have a genuine example of Jesus throughout the midst of that, and if we cowered in fear because of like wanting to look a certain way to the culture, like wanting to have this political correctness rather than holy righteousness, like I feel if we don't put out the truth boldly, even, it won't even be an option for people to look at, because there is an emptiness that I think my generation definitely feels. And I think if you are as real with what filled that emptiness for you, then it can have that open conversation. And even through what I was saying about like hearing what they believe, like seeing the different parallels of like, oh, like if you're looking for that, like this is how Jesus has helped me with that. And it's more of a conversation rather than like a one-sided thing. But yeah, I think that kind of would be my answer to that.
That's very helpful. I do think, as you know, we have so many folks in their 20s looking into astrology and new age mysticism, and turned off by the church that's seen as connected politically and has an agenda and is judgmental. I do think it's important to strip away all of that and just focus on Jesus and what Jesus is doing in our life, and help share that some of those longings, that the mystery of God and the meditation that we're called into, and solitude and Sabbath, like some of these things are antidotes to the anxiety and the fear and that longing. Thank you so much, Trevi. I'm just so proud of you, not just for how you follow the Lord or how you use your gifts to serve him, but just of who you are. You are such a gift. And thanks for taking a few moments to share some of your insights with us.
Yeah, thank you. This is a lot of fun. I appreciate it. And I'm very proud of you, and that I can definitely credit you and mom to a lot of the life that I've found through God. And I would like to thank you for that as well.
Love you. Thanks, sweetheart. All right.
Yeah, love you. Goodbye.